This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome to Punchline Talks, International Women's Day. I'm Mark Owen, and my special guest today is Cicely Elliott, co-founder of Siblings Gin. Welcome to Punchline Talks.
Thank you for having me.
No worries. Just want to find out, really, what's your thoughts on International Women's Day, and what does it mean to you, Cicely?
It's a tricky one because it means a lot to me in some respects, and I think that I want to be very careful with my wording because we've said before in these things, if you don't say everything that you think, sometimes people can fill in the gaps, and it's one of the biggest troubles with our kind of current culture with social media and everything else is that people will jump on one thing that you say and maybe take it out of context and then basically make that your entire personality when it's obviously not. So it does mean a lot to me. I think one of the biggest things for me, first and foremost, is to look at it obviously from a business point of view, because there are so many things that you can talk about with kind of the current state of equality in kind of our culture, because I think looking at the wider picture is way too complicated. So looking at just our culture and within business kind of specifically, I've had quite a unique position in that I'm in business with my brothers. So I work with obviously my sister Clarice and my two brothers, Felix and Digby, and also our mum. So I've seen various different kind of sides of it in both the good and the bad and in many cases the ugly. And taking my brother Felix as kind of the main example, because we do basically the same role in our business. So we're the most kind of direct comparison. We've had really varied experiences. I think my brother even did a post recently on LinkedIn about a time that we went to London and had a meeting, and basically the entirety of the meeting, the guy that we were talking with just spoke to my brother, even though I planned the meeting, set it up with him and everything else. When we got there, it was very much the case that the way he saw it, I was my brother's assistant, and he would do the real business with my brother, and then I could sort of take notes or whatever. and it was bizarre because my brother didn't know very much about the company and things. I had set up the meeting. I just brought my brother with me because we were in London for the day together on some other stuff, and my brother was very angry by the end of it and sort of said, we made all sorts of kind of excuses to have to leave and things, and he just basically assumed that I had absolutely no authority in the business, but also that I didn't really know my stuff in terms of our product and things like that. So there have been cases like that are beyond frustrating, because you can't change a person who thinks like that in the time that you've got, or possibly ever, but in the hour that you've got, you just sometimes have to accept that that's how a person thinks. We've been at trade shows where I've been having a chat with someone and then they look to my brother and say, well, have a word with your manager and then let me know what you think. And it's wildly frustrating because you sort of think it discredits everything you've done up to that point, and you sort of think, well, what about our conversation led you to believe that I wasn't in control of the business? You can only assume that is a preconditioned sort of state of mind for that person. So it is very, very frustrating in that respect. And I think one of the biggest things that needs to change is the micro prejudices, the little things people don't realize they're doing. I think that it's unfortunately become the case recently that, and I'll say men, and I know that people go, not all men. No, obviously not all men. So as a prerequisite to everything I say, not all men, but many men have the mentality that if they don't outwardly think that women are lesser and inferior to them, and they don't outwardly slate women, that they don't hold any prejudice. And that's obviously just bonkers, because we all hold prejudices in us. We're conditioned in a way from early age. We hold these things, but it is our responsibility to take control of them and decide how we use them, and hopefully to try and decide that they're silly and I don't need to think like this. But until lots of men address that that's how they think, there's not going to be any change. And it's not a criticism kind of people, or even the suggestion that they're intentionally doing it. I don't think people realize they're intentionally doing it. I think they've just decided in the midst of our conversation that I'm not in control, presumed that my brother is because he's slightly older than me and male, and then gone for that. Even I work very occasionally with my dad, and in that situation there is no no kind of concept that I could be in charge, but I am, because I run the business and my dad sometimes works for me. And those ones are almost comedic in kind of how people treat us both in that scenario. But I think that's the biggest thing, is at the moment passing the baton over to men and saying, over to you guys, you know, you need to pick up the slack here and realize that you are, whether you like it or not and realize it or not, you are holding these prejudices in you. And until you start to get those out of your system, the first person that I really know who really understands this is actually my younger brother. He's 23, but he's the generation that, like, everything crossed now is starting to change things. I've never spoken to, I have a couple of friends that have a reasonable understanding who are sort of, you know, in their late 20s, 30s. But my younger brother is the only person who I've ever come across and had a proper chat to who seems to really have an understanding of those things and not hold the prejudices, which is like very hopeful and exciting from a female perspective. I know I mentioned this to you before, but also on the flip side, I have kind of opinions. And this is where I think if you even suggest for a second that you don't, you know, hold the feminist flag in every angle of your life, people will kind of jump down your throat and fill in the gaps and decide that you're the anti-feminist. And that's absolutely not the case. Everyone who knows me knows you only have to say one word to get me onto a nice rant for an afternoon or an evening. But one thing that I think is also really valid is my sister and I get invited to events regularly. I've spoken at things and been really lucky to be asked to speak at events. Me and my sister have won awards for being female young entrepreneur and things like this, that my brothers haven't even been invited to the event. And that's been really uncomfortable for us. And I don't know how that sits with other women. I obviously can't speak on behalf of anyone else, but that's been really hard to go to that event and win an award and come back home to my brothers and show them the prize that we got for running the same business as them. Which, you know, maybe that's how other women have felt when their husbands have gone off and won awards and they've been behind the scenes. You know, I'm sure they have. I know my mum was in that position for years with my dad, that he would get kind of all the glory of running the business that she was running with him. But there is a slight element of discomfort when you run a business with men who are doing the same job as you, that you get celebrated just for being a woman. I would just love to be a business person and be acknowledged just as being a business person. And if we were to win an award, you know, we do the same work, we should be, you know, rewarded or just celebrated in the same way. So I've always found that really hard. That there's this kind of slight mentality at the moment that, like, women are doing amazingly just for, like, being women, and you kind of sort of think, I'm just trying to exist in the same workplace as you. I don't need you to kind of hold my hand through it. I just want to be treated the same. I don't want extra credit.
Do you feel there's still a place for women in business awards, or has that sort of ship sailed now? As you know, I can't say anything because I'm a bloke. So, you know, it does in some ways. I can't be invited to that. I couldn't set up men in business awards.
Yeah,
it just wouldn't
that's
happen.
the difficulty, isn't it?
Not that I want to either, by the way. I have to add that as a caveat. Not that.
Yeah, don't want to get cancelled, Mark. Yeah, that's where I find it difficult, because I've felt the value of being part of, like, networking groups. Like, I think there was one that was Women in Biz years ago that I went to, and I actually found that really valuable. It was really refreshing to be in a room full of people who understood kind of, you know, obviously we're all different, but in a sense understood the way I work a little bit more. And, you know, you have sometimes slightly similar sense of humor and things with people, and, you know, that was really lovely. And I know a girl, Fee Grayson, who used to run She Can, She Did, and that was an amazing women's networking event, and I found that really useful and helpful to go to. So I wonder if if my brothers, if the men I know in business would find it useful to go to a men's networking event, but people will immediately see that as, you know, antiquated, and it's a boys' club, and it's, you know, why can't we be invited and things like that. But we are allowed to have women's networking and women's award ceremonies, and so I just don't know. I don't have the answer. I just have my opinion, which is I struggle with being celebrated for running a business like it's an credible achievement because I'm a woman, as though I'm inferior in some way, and I've overcome this massive obstacle and still managed to like run a business, and that feels a bit patronizing. But I also think that the events that I've been to before have been very supportive environment, and I've enjoyed them. So I just wonder if maybe the awards are at a point where they start to take a back seat. There are still a huge amount of difficulties for women running businesses. I am my own boss, so I'm very privileged to not have to answer to someone who's going to, be prejudiced to me in that way. But I do think that there's definitely room for a bit more open-mindedness. I think that people need to, stop trying to be an authority on it and stop trying to make judgments against other people, and just maybe suggest things and just try it out. And that there is just this very polarized opinion at the moment. You're either for or against it, and I don't think everyone is that way. I think lots of people are curious as to how we go forward now we've addressed that women aren't inferior and we actually do know how to run our own bank accounts and stuff. Crazy. Can we now start to take the next step forward and say, what about this, or could we try that, and and see where it goes from here, without writing people off as misogynistic men for trying to do things differently. I don't know.
We could chat forever, and unfortunately we don't have that time. I just want to say thank you ever so much for sharing those thoughts, and it makes me, when you talk about that, it makes me embarrassed. It makes me embarrassed to be a man when you have to deal with that sort of attitude, and I'm always surprised, because I wouldn't do that, and lots of people I work with wouldn't do that. So
I don't think on
that front, it's a great shame. But then again, I can see why the merits of having the business network, the women's business networking. So you can discuss that. So you could talk about it and say, actually, it's not you. It's not, because it must make you feel pretty.
Oh, it makes you feel like what about me personally made me look so incapable in that moment that you assumed that a man needed to step in. But I would say, Mark, like, I don't think it's about being embarrassed at all. I know that would be how it feels, but I think it should make you feel empowered to be better, to be a man supporting women. That's the thing, is like, at the moment there's so many women supporting women and women fighting for their equal rights and equal opportunities, but there aren't very many men at all doing it. And how awesome would it be if you were part of the new movement of men championing women? And I've seen through your work, you always try to include women in your panels, and we've discussed this before, you are that kind of man. But whilst you shouldn't, if you say anything, it feels like you're calling people out, you don't mean to be. I have a husband, I have brothers, I have a father, that I respect immensely, but nonetheless they are still responsible for how they treat people, and it should be, now I'm going to be part of this new generation of men that's making big changes and opening doors for women. It's a tricky world.
I'm glad you mentioned the opening doors, because actually sometimes, I've opened doors and I've actually been told off. Who are you to open the door for me? And
I think manners are manners.
I see a man, I see a woman with a pram, and I'll hold the door open, and I've actually been told off. And so you think to yourself, well, do I step in? Do I not step in? It's very confusing, and this is not me trying to stick up for blokes whatsoever, because like you said in the meeting. So at the moment and it's funny that you said about your younger brother, and you are right. I think there was a generation of things coming in. Don't forget, when we grew up, and this is not when we grew up, there was a lot of homophobia, there was a lot of racist, there was a lot of all sorts of stuff going on. And I like to think our generation, from my grandparents to to my dad, to myself, my children, who don't see anything like that at all. I'd like to think we've come a huge journey, and I think nowadays there's a lot to do. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot to do, but I think your younger generation, your brother, you're dead right, and my daughter, they are so level playing field. They are so open to everything, and
it doesn't take a conscious effort for them to think like that. That's the thing, and you are a product of your environment. My dad's 72. He's bound to think and act the way he does, because that's how he grew up, and you can't change everything in one generation. But Digby, my youngest brother, he doesn't have to think about how to be you know, fair and even and things, and he doesn't, his attitude towards all people of different kind of, all different kind of diverse people of LGBTQ community and all sorts of things like that. He is so open. It doesn't take any conscious effort for him, and that's like amazing, because I'm of the generation now where it doesn't now, but it did at a point. We had to work through it, and Digby is just that bit younger than me, that it doesn't take him any effort, and like I just hope that's us going forward, and we just have to forget about people like Andrew Tate and just put them in a box and hope that they go away.
I think, unfortunately, like everything, you're always going to have people like that. You're always going to have disagreements. What I can say is that there are so many amazing, inspiring women out there driving their business forward, you know, and I meet them on a regular basis, and I never see them as female. You know, to me, they're just the boss. They're just the, you know, but on the flip side, I do admire them more because they've had to overcome those prejudice. They've had to overcome all the stuff that you talked about earlier. And
such a fine line, isn't it?
It is a fine line, but that's all we've got time for, unfortunately, because I could talk to you forever. Maybe over a glass of gin sometime.
Oh, don't. Yeah, you might regret that.
Maybe not, because you'd probably drink me under the table. I would imagine drinking your own gin. Cicely Elliott, thanks for joining Punchline Talks today. Always a pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.